down. I thought I'd just ask some people to take their seats and we'll get so just wanted to introduce myself as well. My name is Jenna, and I'm honored to be here with you guys today as we celebrate the life of Harry Amato Sr. So on behalf of the Amato family and the Routon family, I want to thank you all for being here today. And before we begin service, I just kindly ask that everyone does take a moment to silence or turn off your mobile phones. And as we move forward, let us focus on the life and the legacy of Harry Amato Sr. and our comfort and shared memories and the love that unites us here today. Again, thank you all for being here. And at this time, I would like to invite Tony up to lead the service.
Thanks. Better prepared here. All right. Oh, Harry. What a man. And the testament to him is all the people in this room. You should all consider yourself very lucky to know Harry, to be here today to celebrate his life. And quite a life it was. I'll be speaking pretty much from my perspective and give a little bit of background story about what Harry meant to us and how he was involved with our lives. And then at the end, we'll open it up and we'll let anybody speak who would like to say something. But, you think about a man like Harry, guy who survived World War II in the Merchant Marines, played professional baseball, came back, and obviously sports were a big part of his life for years and years, but then came back and ended up as a plant manager at Frigidaire. And that's sort of where the story starts from our perspective, because my dad was a salesman and sold industrial cutting fluids and so forth to some of the plants in Dade, and came across Harry. And Harry was not a real big fan of salespeople. He didn't like people in his shops. He didn't like them trying to change stuff up. So he gave my dad some grief early on. And if you know my dad, and you know Harry, obviously, it was a game. It was a sport. And Harry obviously was always into sports. So they both saw it as a challenge. And it didn't take long. A couple 3 martini lunches for them to, really start bonding. And they became the best and fastest friends you can imagine. And that's when we came. I've known Harry, I can say almost all of my life. I can't ever remember a time in my life that the Amatos weren't part of it. And their relationship between my mom and dad and the Amatos, and our relationship as we got brought into that with Steve and Todd and Joni, we would go camping together, and we would go on these outings and these adventures, picnics, a lot of picnics. It was just a special time in our lives, and it was always that the Amatos were part of it. There was a time we started going on these yearly trips to Canada. And that was a bit more of an adventure than just the family outings, because we were flying in on logging planes. And Harry definitely had some special talents. You'll hear about some of the, I did ask some of the family and friends to open up about what Harry meant to them, and I'll get to that in a minute. But one special talent that I'm sure at least a few people know in here is Harry's incredible ability to snore. He could wake the dead. We were all in a cabin up in Canada, and I don't see how any of us really got any sleep, because he would just, the rafters were rattling. But it never, at no point in time was it anything that wasn't endearing, because we all just loved Harry so much. We loved Harry, and he and my dad were absolutely best friends. In fact, If my dad ever had a brother, it would be Harry Amato. I used to love watching the two of them at the lake or wherever they were. You get the two of them together and you could just stand back and watch them just going back and forth with each other and razzing each other. It was like two little kids. I mean, it was just a pleasure to watch these two and how they lived and how they loved each other so much. I own a car repair shop in Centerville, and Harry frequented that place with Dan. And after my dad passed in 2020, it was always such a pleasure to see Harry come in because that was as close to my dad as anybody else in this world. And it was just always something that I enjoyed his presence. Everybody in the shop loved Harry. And, it was just a pleasure to have him come in and be able to shake his hand and give him a hug. And then Harry met Miss Bailey. And it was a union of a whole other family that was just a very natural progression because you get together with all the Bailey kids. And he came in and filled a spot as not only a friend to all of them, but a grandfather and a father and a partner. And anytime anybody needed any help, whatever the situation was, Harry was always there for them. I'd go over to his house from time to time, and he was doing stuff that I just was like, why are you doing this? Given his age sometimes.
Yeah.
But he just said it's something that needed to be done, and I wanted to help out. So he was always had the biggest heart. And I put a text out to the family and asked them to describe what Harry was like and what he meant to each and every one of them. And there was pretty much a common theme. You all know Harry. First and foremost, his demeanor is so peaceful, and he was always even-keeled. And there was nothing that, he'd get upset from time to time. In fact, one of the comments that came back was the way Harry would say, "Now, goddamn," pardon my language here, kids. But he had a command of that word, and he was just the way he delivered it. That's about as riled as you were ever going to see Harry. But always so easy to laugh, and always had a great smile. And again, like I said, he would just help anybody at any time with anything they needed. Paul was always there. Everybody that I asked, first thing that they came up with was fishing. Paul loved to fish, and he loved to teach kids to fish. And I'm sure some of the kids in here today have been a part of that as well. So everybody said, I learned how to clean a fish. I learned how to tie a hook. And it was all because of Harry. He was the guy that taught everybody and loved the outdoors, loved to fish, and certainly passed that on to my boys as well as a lot of other people in this room. And I don't know if this is a generational thing. Hank, you might know. Where'd Hank go? There he is. To watch these guys, when we first got a lake house down there, we had a couple stakes set up and started playing horseshoes. And between Harry and my dad, I don't know if it's like riding a bike or whatever, but these guys never lost. They were dead ringers, the both of them. And it's like, we're trying to learn. These guys obviously have been doing it for years, but I mean, and then bocce. When we joined the Italian club and they played bocce, my dad could hardly see where he was throwing the ball. And he and Harry were like, well, Vic, I think you got to go over here just a little bit. And Dad'd be like, right out here, and boom, it's right there. I mean, just amazing ability. The other thing that was a common thing was, and right before I came up here, I grabbed Harry's hands. Harry had hands big hands, powerful, gnarly looking hands. And anytime you shook his hand, you knew you were getting a handshake. And it was just a feeling that you got. You looked at that thing and you looked at the history and the experience that that hand has. And it was just something that everybody's like, I just remember. It was, giving Harry a handshake with those big paws that he had. And because of that, I don't know if there's anything around here or not, but you ever see how he holds a beer? I mean, it's crazy to me, just look, he commands the beer. Most people will take a beer and they'll grab it like this. Harry holds it like this. And it was one of those strange things that I recognize. And now thinking back, I'm sure some of you will know the way he held the beer, it was just like he owned that beer. And it was, oh my God, just a crazy thing that stuck in my mind. But one of my sons wrote to me when I was getting ready for this, and he said, I've touched on it before, talking with Harry made him feel like he was talking to Grant, talking to my dad. And I truly believe that these two were connected. And now they're up there. And they're having a beer together, and Harry's got that hand on that beer just like this. And I'm sure that they are looking down on us, celebrating as we are celebrating Harry's life. And of course, Bubba will crash the party up there, I'm sure. But he will be truly missed. He will be truly missed and lived a great example of a life. And this is a testament to all of that. So, Godspeed, Paul. It's been a pleasure. I'd like to open this up. I know Josh is going to come up and say a few words. Anybody else that, again, this was pretty much from my perspective. I'd love to hear some other perspectives and some other stories. So start with Josh, if you want to come up.
All right, I'm Josh Bailey and Dana's nephew. Dana was Harry's stepdaughter, and she wrote a little something that I'm going to read to everybody here. I want to start by saying that while many of you knew him as a neighbor, a friend, or family, Paul was so much more than just a stepdad to me. He was a father. He was my father in every way that mattered. He was a constant, a steady hand in the storm, and someone who loved us with all he had. He was also a wonderful grandfather to my kids and nephews. And the way he cared for my mom, our Mimi, even through the toughest times, was nothing short of inspiring. You could see the love in his eyes, and you could feel it in the way that he always showed up. Paul was a man who wanted to help no matter what. Whether it was fixing a door, patching a roof, helping someone move a couch, or let's be honest, supervising with a cold beer in hand, he never minded doing it. That's just who he was. He always wanted to fix everything, and he usually could. I think about the times we'd just be outside, nothing fancy, just standing around. He'd crack open a beer, chat, maybe help a neighbor with something. And the neighbors, well, they were a little jealous, not because of the help, but because he always made time to enjoy life. He made it look easy, effortless. And he made people feel like they were worth showing up for. Paul had a story for every situation, and every single one of them was special because it was his story. He told them with that spark in his eye, the kind of storytelling that made you want to listen, even if you'd already heard it 100 times. I'll never forget the time he borrowed my cotton candy pink bike to check the mailbox. I was inside with Mom, and he didn't come back for a long time. When I finally went outside, there he was, on the ground, bleeding, and a kind stranger tried to help him up. I asked, "Where's my bike?" And he looked up at me and said, "To hell with your bike. What about me? I'm bleeding everywhere." Even when he was hurt, he he made us laugh. And of course, there was the infamous Dayton traffic jam when Paul asked a police officer what the holdup was. Turns out President Obama was in town. Paul, being Paul, made a sarcastic comment like, someone should shoot that guy. Obviously a joke, but the FBI didn't find it quite funny. And let's just say the traffic jam was the least of his problems that day. He ended up in an FBI interrogation room, delayed way longer than if he had just stayed in his car and waited it out. I think we can all see Paul talking to the officer and saying that nonchalantly. But that was Paul, unfiltered, honest, and always saying what he thought, and never apologizing for it. But he also had a heart bigger than anyone I've ever known. He showed up every time. And no matter what was going on, you knew you could call him and he'd be there. That's what I'm going to miss the most, just knowing he was always there. A phone call away, a helping hand, a beer in the garage, a story waiting to be told. Thank you, Paul, for being my friend, my dad, and for always being exactly who you were. We'll miss you more than words can say. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to come up and say a good word?
Well. Hi, I'm Phil. I'm Harry's son. I'm the fourth of five. I first met Harry in 1953. And he was, as everybody's been saying, he was kind of a special guy. And some of the random thoughts I wrote down are just basic bullet points, but they're kind of a chronology of how I saw it, my perspective. I put down that he was quiet but a force, and he was that. And one of the memories that I have, and I don't know if any of the other 5 or 4, Jane came along there, would have the same memory. But when we were disciplined, everyone got disciplined if one of us did something. So he had a nice chair right outside the kitchen door, and if you knew that this was coming, you tried to not go through the kitchen door, and he got you every time. And everybody would get their little strike. There wasn't a beating or anything like that, but you knew you were in trouble, or you wouldn't do whatever that other person had done. So it's quite a lesson. The other experience of the kitchen door, at least for me, was he loved to grab you and lay over his lap and start looking for loose teeth. And if you had even the slightest loose tooth, he would work that son of a bitch until it came out. It would be an hour. It would be an hour. He's wiggling back and forth, wiggling back and forth. And he just loved it to death. I never got a chance to do that in jail. The other thing that was very sports related was he could curve a snowball. And when we were out having a snowball fight or whatever, he'd come home from work and he'd see us, having a snowball fight. And his method was to pick up some snow and go like that. He had the hardest, I think he put rocks in it, but you could hear it sizzling. And you could be hiding, but if he caught sight of you, he hit. It was like immediate. You knew once he locked eyes with you, you were going to get hit with a snowball, and he got you every time. One of the fun things that we did was he used to have poker parties. He had a little poker room down in the basement, swinging doors, the whole thing. So me and I think one of the Quinlans, Ryan Quinlan, would be the bartenders, and we would empty the ashtrays, which got rather full back then. I mean, this is like 1964 or whatever. So people were smoking like chimneys. But we would get the beers for them and empty the ashtrays and we make tips. So that was our tip. I don't think any of us got an allowance that I recall. But then, what was it, 65, there was kind of a big lapse because Dad and Mom broke up. So we didn't see a lot of Dad in that time, but when we did, he would try to do fun stuff with us and like the characterization you were giving, he could do pretty much anything and did it well. And that was always, amazing to me, and I think I learned a lot from that. And caught some of it, so that was good. When I was in high school, Dad had converted to Catholicism to marry my mom. I was at Carroll High School, and apparently I must have done something wrong. No, I can't imagine. So I got called into the principal's office, and I found out what it takes to get kicked out of Carroll High School. It's calling the principal an asshole. So he said, go out and sit on the bench. I'm calling your mom and dad. So mom and dad were already divorced at the time, but they both showed up and went into the office. So I'm sitting out there on the Group W bench and hear Dad inside, and he says, well, you're an asshole. Calling the principal an asshole. He walks out, come on, Phil, let's go. So that was the last I saw of the inside of Carroll High School. I was so proud that my dad had the same opinion of the priest at Carroll. He didn't give out credit a lot. You knew when you got credit from him, you probably deserved it. And after high school, I was coaching a Little League team. I think it was like F League or whatever they call it. And we had a really good team. And in Kettering, as many of you might know, we didn't have fences around, there was no fence to hit the ball over. You hit the ball, and as far as it would go, that outfielder had to run and get it, and you had to keep hauling to try to make it in. So he had a league in Vandalia. I don't know if you still have it when you were young, Steve, but he had a league in Vandalia, and he invited our team up because we had won our league, and we had a tournament up there. So we walked in, and here's this field with a fence. And we're thinking, oh my gosh, this is a tiny little field, what the heck? And where the fence was, we would have naturally put our outfielders beyond that fence, in our league. So we just cleaned up in this tournament. We were hitting home runs after home runs, and we had really aggressive base runners because we had to, because there was no hitting over the fence and making a home run. You had to make a home run. So he came up to me afterwards and said, good game, great job. And I was like, oh my God. Was that Dad or did he say that to me? I mean, that was the first he's ever said that to me. I mean, it was like, wow, this is great. So anyway, we had a little bonding moment there. After that, or sometime after that, I moved to California. And when Dad came out to California, he came to visit me in LA, and then he went up to San Francisco to visit Sue. But the job I had at the time allowed me to go into the Angel Stadium and Dodger Stadium to do maintenance work on telephones. So I said, Dad, do you want to go up to Dodger Stadium? Oh, sure, yeah, let's go. So we drove up, went into Dodger Stadium, walking around, came down through the dugout. Somebody says, hey, Harry, how you doing? And he turns around, he knew this guy in Dodger Stadium. So, and this happened all the time with him. It kind of happened where's my beautiful wife? There she is. She taught for 30 years, and everywhere we go, she'd run into students. But this was Dad in California, of all places. And some guy says, hey. So the next visit he came out, several years later, we went out deep sea fishing. Coming back on the boat, got off the dock. Hey, Lefty, what are you doing out here? Ran into another guy. I don't know if it happened to you guys, but just about everywhere he went, he knew somebody, or ran into somebody. And I mean, it was even for our wedding. Barb and I were married in the house we grew up in the backyard. And Dad's contribution was knowing a guy that could get him the case of beer for the reception. So he brought all the beer. So that was great. But I think in the last 6 months, I think I've told people this, we talked more in the last 6 months than I think we did my whole life. And most of it was about him getting old and wanting to die. And we talk and I don't know why I'm here. It's, what's the point and all this? And I'd say, well, Dad, you can end it at any time. There's lots of ways to end it, He's like, yeah, but I might have to end it, He's like, well, if you want to go, there's ways to go. But he'd laugh, but I think he was just, thinking about all his friends who had gone before, Vic and Don Rieger and all them. And he, I think, in the last few days, he was kind of performing. And I don't know if you guys got the same feeling, because when we were in the hospital, and I think it was the day before he went to hospice.
The day of, same day.
Oh, but he was so animated. So he was laughing and talking and recognizing everybody. The only thing he got wrong, I think, was Hank. And he was calling us both Phil, and thinking we were his brothers. But I think that's when they were giving him the kind of cognitive test. And I think one of the siblings told me that they were asking him, what day it is, and what time it was, and who's the president. And when they asked him who the president was, he says, oh, I think it's that guy that nobody likes.
Covers all of them.
That's all of them, yeah. So anyway, it struck me that with that almost performance, it was almost like he was the star of the team again. And what struck me was just this vision of him playing a game, and he had maybe Vic on first base coach, Don on third base, and he's running around the bases, waving to the fans, and as he gets waved around third and heading for home, he said bye. So that's how I saw it. It seemed very appropriate. So anyway, love you, Dad, and I'm sure he's up there with Vic and Don and playing ball. And maybe with Mom, and she's probably saying, you remember that ball that I have boy? Should I tell that story?
Sure, better now. Yeah.
Better now? Okay. He had a ball that was signed by Honus Wagner. And some of you will know who that is and some won't. Very famous ball player. And my memory of it is that after the divorce, he mistakenly left it there. And Mom threw it to either Hank or I and said, hey, go out and play with this ball. So we took this ball that would probably have paid for a couple of our college tuitions. We took it out and played in the street with it. So that's the ball right back there. The older of the two balls, yeah. So, but you can't read Honus's name on it anymore. Sorry, Dad. There is a ball back there. I will just make one announcement cleaning up here. The grandkids, if you haven't gone back with the kids, everybody that signed it already, but there's enough room for the 16 grandkids to sign that ball. It's the newer of the two. So if you want to do that, feel free. So that's my little speech. All right? Thank you. Who's next? Sue's next? Sue's
Oh, so you coming up?
I'm Susan, often called Sue, in Ohio. And I wrote down a couple things because I didn't know if I would do well extemporaneously, so I'm just gonna read it. And I'm gonna talk about Dad more recently. People are covering the old days, I think. I came back here in January from Northern California, where I live, to visit Dad. And that was during the big snow. He wasn't driving, so I drove us around once the roads were clear enough. And as most of you know, Dad was a living, breathing GPS. We drove into downtown Dayton and talked about the Dragons in his early work years, and we drove into North and West Dayton and talked about old ball fields and later work years. We drove out into Sugar Creek and we talked about Windshire Terrace and the house remodeling and fishing. We drove down Stewart Road and talked about Elaine's farm and how things have changed. We drove to Enon and talked about Uncle Mike, Aunt Joan, and my cousins, all who he loved very much. We drove into Springfield and talked about his parents and my parents, and my mom's parents and his siblings and hers, and talked about childhood adventures and looked for houses he lived in and houses other people lived in. The house he bought for his parents and his mother's house later that I remembered inaccurately as having a big garden in front, but it didn't. And my mother's house, I remember quite well. He talked about the friends he had in his childhood, especially Don Rinker, who he was about to lose. In fact, that drive we took was after visiting Don in the hospital just days before he died. And when we arrived in Don's room, Don was a little bit out of his head, and we walked in and he saw Dad and he said, "Harry!" and held his hands, and Harry and Dad was so incredibly tender with Don. I cried and the nurses cried. Anyway, Dad directed me through a zigzag of country roads, so we both loved driving on country roads, and he would say, "Turn right," and I'd say, "You mean right?" But he always knew where he was. Anyway, we got to Yellow Springs, where I'd suggested we had lunch, and he'd said, "What would I eat there?" Not the first time I'd made him go though. We'd gone in the fall with gorgeous leaves falling all around us, and it was so beautiful. And this time, it was covered in snow, and deep snow. But he got out of the car, and we walked a little ways in and took a photograph. And anyway, he was an explorer, and I found so many photos of all of his trips, his fishing trips and his baseball trips and his visits to Phil and I and on the West Coast. And I think he took pictures, and there were pictures of just open, long roads. And he took them while he was driving, apparently. So, he loved it. And I think it's kind of genetic, not generic. And until Sunday, April 26th, that was our last in-person adventure. Although we had some enjoyable phone calls as the conditions were right and he could hear and, things weren't too crazy or he hadn't woken up from a nap. We had some great phone calls, actually. But I drove in, I flew in, I got here Saturday
April 25th and went straight to Dad's hospital room. And he was sleepy, and he seemed disoriented, he seemed a little uncomfortable. His speech wasn't clear. I told him I just arrived, and he seemed to hear that, and but he seemed to be in some pain, so we got him some medication. And then I returned on Sunday, and Phil's referred to this. I arrived in his room and I opened the curtains so that there would be some sunlight and he might wake up. And but I thought, oh, put his hearing aids in, and so I'm putting his hearing aids in and fumbling around, and he opens his eyes and he says, "They're too loose," that clearly. And I'm like, okay, yay, I'm doing this badly, and he woke up. So it was the first time I was really glad to hear from him that I was doing a bad job. We talked, and he looked a little confused, and I told him where he was. I said, "You're in the hospital, and you're sick, and they maybe could help you if you have surgery." And he's like, "No surgery." I'm like, "Okay, that's clear." And so I told him that everybody was coming and we were going to meet with hospice. And he seemed relieved to hear that. And so then he seemed to rest, and we all went off. You guys weren't there, but Steve, you were there, and we met with the hospice nurse, and then we went back to Dad's room. And Dana and Taylor and Kelsey arrived, and we all just hung out in his room, and he joked with us, and he laughed with us, and he laughed at us, and we laughed at him, and it was, just this fun experience, and I think he was singing. I'm not sure everybody agrees.
I agree.
I agree.
Oh, cool, yeah, he was
Shocked
singing
me.
about a needle and a beagle, I think.
A needle and a beagle.
Yeah. And he was so excited to talk to Hank about the honor flight that Hank had gone the day before. And Dad started telling us, "Oh yeah, and remember I met that guy. And we're like, "Oh yeah, right, who's that guy?" And then I forget if he figured it out or we said first.
He said Doyle.
Doyle. And then he kept saying, "Yeah, Bob Doyle. Doyle, he said. And we're like, "Yeah," and we're all just laughing at. It was so fun just to hang out with him. And we told him that we loved him, and he told us that he loved us. And not long after that, hospice came to get him and took him to his room there, and he was really tired, and so he went to sleep. And the next morning, I think you got there, and I got there, and I forget the order, but
He was sleeping.
yeah, he was just sleeping. And, I'd say, Dad, I thought for sure, he was so there yesterday. But he didn't wake up one time, and I don't know if he did this with anyone else. I was talking to him, and he opened his eyes and looked at me, and then closed his eyes, and that was it. And we were thinking, after Sunday, he's going to bounce. He always bounces. He's going to come back, And he didn't. And, my feeling at that point was that he was doing the internal work of dying. And he died Monday night. But I know that Sunday, Dad threw a party for us. It was so clear. It was his last party for all of his kids. And he entertained, and he was entertaining, and he told stories, Doyle, and I believe he showed us, as he's done so many times in life, just how it's done. how you do it, you know? Dad was a force, and he changed through his life, I believe. When he was young, he was different from when he was old, but he was a force. And being his child meant that you were living up to something. You know, you were becoming something better, trying. And he was magnetic. He had gravity. He just pulled you to him. And when he did, you felt his energy and you got some of it. And he made you feel like you were in the club of Harry Amato. You know, I mean, he had that kind of charisma. And that's how it felt Sunday. We were all in the club of Harry Amato. So thanks, Dad, wherever you are, for our closeness, for your humor and intelligence and your strength and your view of the good life and even a good death. You're an amazing person. And I think that Grace wants to speak, and then anyone else is welcome to come up.
Okay, good afternoon. For anyone who doesn't know, my name is Grace, and I am one of Grandpa Harry's great-granddaughters. I wanted to start by saying thank you all for being here today to honor and celebrate the life of someone truly extraordinary. To try and sum up who he was in a few minutes feels impossible, because to me, Papa Harry never felt like just part of the family, but to me, he was the heart of it. Some of my most precious memories with him are the simplest ones, like how he'd sit with me and tell me such great stories. He could remember things from decades ago, like they happened yesterday. And when he told them, I could feel every word. He didn't just speak, he took me with him, and I always felt honored to be in that space with him. It was his way of sharing not just memories, but pieces of who he was. I remember one afternoon at Grandma Lynn's. We sat for 3 hours just talking. It seemed like we talked about everything. And he asked just as much about me as he shared about himself. In that space of time, I felt closer to him than I ever had. Then there was my graduation party. He showed up and he gave me the biggest hug. And he said, I love you so much, and I'm so proud of you. I go to Miami University, and he showed up in a Cincinnati Reds shirt to represent the red for me. And I'll never forget that moment. It meant so much to me. I'll also never forget all the family gatherings at Marion's, which were his idea, most of the time anyway. Those gatherings, those meals, the laughter, they're such a beautiful part of who he was to me. Papa also had this amazing ability to make me laugh. It didn't matter what time of day it was, he always had a way with his words, and he always had a sly joke ready to make you crack a smile. Even in serious moments, he could break the tension with a perfectly timed line, even if it made no sense. His humor was part of his love. What I think about most lately, and what I can see and feel, is the way he hugged me before I left Jefferson. And he'd hold me close, and he'd pull back just a little bit, and he'd look at me, and he'd say, gosh, have you gotten bigger since I last saw you? And I'd say, no, Papa, I'm the same height. And he'd always end it with an I love you, honey, every time. Those simple sentences spoken with such sincerity melted my heart, and I'd give anything to hear it one more time. For me, Grandpa Harry showed me what it was to live with heart, with humility, with humor, and with love. And it was real for me. He gave me stories, laughter, hugs, and a sense of family that I'll carry with for the rest of my life. So thank you, Pat, for every story, every laugh, every proud word, and every I'll see you next time. I'm missing more than words can ever say. But you're with me in my memories and in my heart. Very few have lived a life as well as you did, but I'm honored to have known such a one-of-a-kind man. I wish I could have hugged you one last time. But I know one day that wish will come true. I love you, Grandpa Harry, and I hope more than anything I should do that. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to come up and say a word?
Harry was a man's man, no doubt about it. Thing that tickled me one time, I belonged to Michael Amato's family. I married Mary Ann Chang, Mary Ann Amato. And I remember they had a gathering to play softball. There was a reunion. And Mike's family had 3 girls, 3 sons, and one nephew, one grandson. That was it. Well, Harry's family's got all these young bucks out there. And they're throwing the ball around and everything. And I said to Harry, I said, you been practicing? He said, hell yeah, for 2 weeks. They could have picked up butt without practicing. I met Harry when he asked me, where did you get Mary Ann's engagement ring? I need to buy Pat one. And I brought it to the truth. And in the last 2 years, we've been very, very close. Because I lost my wife 3 months after he lost Pat. I talk to him every Sunday. Every single Sunday I called him. And when I missed him, I knew he was out to lunch with all the guys. But he always had wonderful, wonderful things to say about his family. He was a hell of a good family man. We all make mistakes in lives. We all do. But boy, he really made up for everything that I know. And he missed Pat a lot. I remember the first time I met Judy. Okay, we call him Uncle Harry. And they said, who the freak is that Chinese guy calling him Uncle Harry? But that's when I knew Uncle Harry. He's a heck of a guy, that's all I gotta say. One hell of a man. And he's touched each and every one of our lives to the point we will never forget him. God bless you, Uncle Harry.
Anyone else? Well, I think we've all heard some great things here today about what a wonderful man Harry was and how he's touched all of our lives. And as I said when I opened up, consider each and every one of us fortunate to be able to have known a man like that. Harry, Paul, Uncle Harry, we're going to miss you. We're going to miss you every day. We thank you for being a part of all of our lives. So from here, I believe we've got some refreshments and some stuff in the other room. We welcome everybody to stay and tell some more stories about Harry. But thank you all so much for coming today. And thank you for allowing me to come up here and speak to all of you.
So this does conclude the funeral services for Harry Amato Senior today. On behalf of the Amato family and the Rathsong family, again, I want to thank you all for being here. Now, at this time, we're going to begin dismissal in the chapel here. We're going to start from the back of the chapel, work our way up. You are welcome to come say a final goodbye to Harry and offer condolences to the family. Again, thank you all, and may you all go in peace.